Okay, aloha and mahalo to everyone who is attending live and those watching later. Please remember to enjoy the mele of West Maui by listening to the Na Hoku Hano Hano nominated and winning musical albums, Lei Na Honua Pi'ilani Songs of West Maui, and Lei Na Honua Pi'ilani Na Mele Ho, available on all digital platforms. The accompanying songbook is available from Kamehameha Publishing. And mahalo to Professor Wilson for being with us this evening.
Aloha, bili na mai kako, mahalo ya oko I ke a koa na mai. This series is co-sponsored by HK West Maui Community Fund, the University of Hawaii Maui College, the Hawaiian Studies Department, the Kue Petition Hui, and co-hosted by Na'aikane o Maui Cultural Center of Lahaina and the Hui Loha Aina o Kamalulu Lele. These lectures occur monthly. The series features a host of new and established scholars also work on Hawaii and Hawaiian communities. We proudly present this to you via Zoom and live through HK West Maui's Facebook page. Tonight's presentation, Linguistic Evidence for the Source of the Hawaiian People and Related East Polynesian. Dr. Pila Wilson is a professor of the Hawaiian Studies at the Kahakauila o Ke'elikolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University at Hilo. Professor Wilson is a linguist whose research has focused on the origins of the Hawaiian language and other East Polynesian languages. Professor Wilson has also done a lot of work to help revitalize the language use. Give a virtual round of applause for tonight's speaker. Aloha nui, Dr. Pila Wilson. Aloha.
Mahalo nui loa. Aloha ko poe e aloha mai lao. I want to recognize the people of Maui, so thank you so much. Maui no ka oi. Anything that has to do with scholarship, you have to remember Laina Luna and all those famous scholars were there. So mahalo nui loa. My talk tonight is about the linguistic evidence for where the Hawaiians came from, in particular the East Polynesians that Hawaiian belong to, the friends in the New Zealand, Tahiti, Marquesans. So I'm going to go over that tonight, but also want to acknowledge that linguistics and science changes every day. You can have a different answer. So you have to keep the traditional Hawaiian stories alive about the origin of people to it as well, like halo, etc. I don't want to try to replace that story. This is just linguistics research that's been going on. So maybe I should start. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a video, a PowerPoint. Hopefully I am going to be able to do this. Okay, so I hope, Kanani, can everybody see this? I'm assuming
yes.
Hi.
Okay, so my topic is going to be primarily on where do the Eastern Polynesians as a group come from. And I'll talk maybe a little bit at the end where, if we have time, where the Hawaiians break out of that. But I want to focus on this question about how did people come into this huge area that's East Polynesia. So here we have the canoe. We know they came on a canoe. People are sailing around on canoes. So what, oh, this way? Well, now I can't get my slide to go. What's wrong? Oh, maybe this will do it. Over here. Oh, okay. So here we have a map of Polynesia. So we always talk about the Polynesian Triangle. So you can see that big area on the right-hand side, the right-hand side of my screen. It has Hawaiian Islands in the top, New Zealand in the bottom, and Tonga and Samoa close to Fiji. That's the Polynesian Triangle, but there's also Polynesians on little islands on the eastern side of the larger island chains of Melanesia. Like down at the bottom there is New Caledonia, then Vanuatu, used to be called New Hebrides, and moving up the Solomon Islands, and even into Micronesia, there's some what are called Polynesian outliers that are outside of the triangle. So we're going to talk a lot about them. later on and their connections to Hawaii. So maybe I should point out, so here we have the dotted line here, over here separates East Polynesia. The East Polynesians are the biggest group. And that's the closest relatives of the Hawaiian language. And then we have Samoa. If you see Samoa, Samoa and is connected to all the languages other than Tongan. So Tongan is by itself, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in linguistics. But the used to be way back in the 1950s and before that, the people just divided Polynesia into Eastern Polynesia and Western Polynesia. So we're going to start with that. So West Polynesia is like the Samoan Taupo here dancing away. And East Polynesians is like these people from Rarotonga or from Hawaii. And there's a lot of differences, not just in language, but in culture between those two areas. And then you have the kind of forgotten people out there on the outliers. So they're located on small islands outside the Polynesian Triangle. And linguists and archaeologists agree that they came from central West Polynesia, which is where Tonga and Samoan are. But people have tended to kind of ignore them because they're so remote and small. Okay, but I'm going to begin at the earliest beginning of language that we know about. So linguists, people who study language, and archaeologists, the ones who look for artifacts, they do their excavations. They all agree that Polynesian are a branch of the Austronesians. So I'm going to show you a map just after this. And maybe you've heard of this already, that they began in Taiwan. They must have come from the mainland China area, but the language evidence is all there on the island of Taiwan. Then they moved down through the Philippine Islands. So if the Filipinos say, oh, mata, we say mata for eyes, say, oh, maka, that's the same. And langit, they say for sky, and lani, there's still some connections with the Filipinos. So don't be cruel to the Filipinos, gotta say, oh, we're related. Okay, and then these people, they moved through the Philippines down into the eastern part of Indonesia and came along the northern coast of New Guinea into the islands of Melanesia. And along there, they kept going until they reached Fiji. And the Fijians are the closest relatives of the Polynesians. And then they moved into Tonga and Samoa. And so we're going to call that Central West Polynesia. That was the first part of Polynesia that was settled. Everybody agrees on this. There's no dispute. So here we have the Austronesians, Taiwan up here. Can you see my little arrow? I don't know. Can you see it? Right there? No. They're through the Philippine Islands, along the north coast of New Guinea, through the Melanesian to Fiji, and then we have Tonga and Samoa right here, because that's where it started. This is commonly agreed to. So now I got to go to the next. I forgot how I moved it along. Maybe, oh, okay. And how do the archaeologists trace it? They trace it by a type of pottery they call it lapita pottery. And maybe some of you have heard about that. So when these Austronesians moved into the Pacific, they were making pottery. But once they got to Tonga and Samoa, they had pottery already. This is a piece of pottery found, I believe, in Tonga. They evolved into Polynesians. Their culture changed and they gave up making pottery. They didn't use pottery anymore. And so whenever they settled other places they went, they didn't use pottery. So we know this. So this is the basic linguistics and archaeology. So now we're getting into a little more of my topic. So used to think there was a west and the east of Polynesians, but no, this guy Andrew Pauly, in 1966, which now is a long time ago, he studied the languages and he said Tonga, Tongan, and then there's this little island not far from Tonga. They have a distinct language history from everybody else. And he also said that, boy, the East Polynesians are very, very similar. So you can go to New Zealand and say, in Hawaiian, you say, Owai Koinoa, what's your name? And the Maori say, Kowai Toingoa. So there's many, many similarities. And more differences between the East Polynesian languages than Samoan. And so Pauly looked at this and he said, oh, everybody is nuclear. That means everybody versus the Tongans. So that's one thing. And they didn't know much about the outliers, but it was clear that they're related to the nuclear Polynesians. So I hope I'm not going too fast. So he made the basic division between Tongan or Tongan and Niuean and everybody else. Okay, so I'm going to show you how he determined it with two example words. So what they look for is linguists look for shared innovations. That means there's a change that everybody inherited. So for instance, if everybody in the family has regular old black Hawaiian hair, and then suddenly this Ehu baby comes out, okay? So then the Ehu baby, all the descendants of that Ehu baby are Ehu. So that's like an innovation, something new, and all the descendants have that one trait. Ehu is not really a good example because you can mix people who are not Ehu can have Ehu babies, and then people don't necessarily have Ehu babies, but this means it's always inherited. It's a shared innovation. So an example is here we have at the top here, this is called Proto-Polynesian. That means the ancestor of all the Polynesian languages when they first got to Central Western Polynesia. And they had these two words here. One is the word for here, and it was any, and the word for one, and it was tasa. And so in Proto-Tongan, which is the ancestor of Tongan and Niuean, they kept those words as they were. So they have any, and they pronounced the S as an H, so they had taha, any and taha. But the proto-nuclear Polynesians, and it's believed that they were living in Samoa, they changed the any by switching the vowels around to nei, as in Hawaii nei, or Maui nei, right here in Hawaii, right here in Maui. And then they changed the word for one from tasa to tasi. They changed the a to an I or e. And then we have tasi lua tolufa, kahi lua koluha kahi. In Hawaii, we have kahi, and the Maoris have tahi, and the Rapa Nuians have tahi, and the Tahitians, well, they changed theirs to hoi. The Rarotongans say ta'i, it's everybody in East Polynesia says has this ancestor of tasi, and also into the outliers. So this is the big division by a common shared innovation. They made one change to a word, and that word was inherited by everybody. And they might have changed a little bit later, but you can still find out that that was the original change. Okay, so I hope you guys can follow that. So proto means the ancestor. So at the very beginning, people were living in Central Western Polynesia, and then they developed dialects, and one is called Proto-Tongic, and one is called Proto-Nuclear Polynesian. And Hawaiian descends from Proto-Nuclear Polynesian. So here we have a picture of Samoa. I don't know what island it is. Maybe let's say it's Hawaii, since I'm living on Hawaii. Okay, so language shows that it was from people living in the Samoa area rather than the Tonga area that most Polynesians descend. So that's great. Now, the next question is, okay, so here we have a map again. So here's Samoa. I don't know if my arrow is showing it. And here's Tonga over here. So it's just like they're further away than Maui and Kauai, or even from Hawaii to Kauai. I think they're further away from each other, and they developed into their own dialects. And then the Tongans went to Niue over here, but they weren't the ones who expanded out. It was from Samoa. Now the question is, how did they get over here? How did they get into Eastern Polynesia? And how did they get into the outliers? So what I'm going to say is, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to say yet. Okay. So this is the common belief for many, many years, and is still held by a number of people. So what route did these Polynesian settlers follow to reach Hawaii? And these are the nuclear Polynesians. They had to start out in Samoa. Oh, they went the Samoa East Polynesian hypothesis. It even existed before Poly, that it was from Samoa. They just sailed right up from Samoa, and they went someplace in East Polynesia and started a little homeland where the East Polynesian, Proto-East Polynesian language developed. But the problem is they can't figure out where it was. Did they go to Tahiti first? A lot of people thought it was Tahiti for a long time. Did they go to the Marquesas? And people started thinking about Marquesas because they'd find archaeology that they dated earlier than in Tahiti. Or maybe it was in Rarotonga in the Southern Cook Islands. It's the closest place to Samoa. Why would they go all the way to the Marquesas? Or why would they go even all the way to Tahiti when Rarotonga is pretty close? So this guy Pauly, who was looking at these shared innovations, which was kind of new when he did it, he assumed that the East Polynesians came from Samoa, and based on geography, all they had to do was just go sail east. Oh no, see, he proposed, however, look at that, Baston. He proposed East Polynesia was settled very early based on the difference in language between Samoan and East Polynesian. He said that the language differences between East Polynesia indicates that it was settled very, very early, a long, long time ago. In fact, he had the split between nuclear Polynesian and that East Polynesia was the very first place settled after Samoa. Now, also after the Samoa area. And he also said that they had to stay in a homeland. They had this homeland where they were together, which maybe was Tahiti. And they lived there for a long time, and their language changed after that long time. And then they spread out, came to Hawaii, went to New Zealand. And that's why the languages are really different from Samoan, and yet they're very similar to each other. So I'll say that again, that they must have had a homeland. This is the Samoan East Polynesian hypothesis. I'm not going to support this, but they believed that first East Polynesia had to be settled a long time ago in some homeland such as Tahiti. And then they lived in that homeland for a long time together, and the language changed. And then it spread out. So it changed, but because it changed so much over time, and then only lately did the people spread out, that's why Hawaiian is so similar to Maori. So that's the idea. From Samoa, move east, find a homeland, stay there for a long time, and then spread out. And leave Samoa very early. Okay, so what about the outliers? Well, he sees the outliers as descending from Samoan, and then there's these other islands not far from Samoa that have kind of mountainous, they're not little atolls. He thought that they moved there and then they went off into the outliers. So he split nuclear Polynesian between East Polynesian and Samoic outlier. East Polynesians moved out early, and then later on, the people in Samoa spread around, but they are more similar to each other over there, but they're not. It's kind of hard to tell how they are connected to each other. While the East Polynesian, it's very obvious. It's very obvious that Hawaiian and Tahitian are related. Very obvious that Hawaiian and Maori are related. Okay, so this hypothesis is still held by most archaeologists who are, their evidence is based on, you know, the artifacts that they find, and they're also by dating. However, till this day, they have not found any direct archaeological connection in artifacts between early Samoa. So in other words, if you dig down through all the layers of generations of Samoans living in Samoa and all the things they left, and over time things change, you have different ways of making your fish hooks or whatever. You go down deep enough to where they think this hypothesis says East Polynesians left early. You find that earliest date when maybe the East Polynesians left, and then you look in East Polynesia, is the fish hook the same as the one, that early one in Samoa? They haven't been able to find that. They haven't been able to find it. So this is a problem. And later on, I'm going to tell you about their problem with dates. Okay, so now we go into the next thing. So here we have this guy in Samoa, a nice, handsome Samoan man. He's thinking, where did they go from here? We know that we are the heart, they say. We are the heart of Polynesia. And of course they are, because, oh, you guys out in Hana, you know, you have Hamoa Beach. Hamoa is connected to the word Samoa. So they have that, and they have an island named Ta'u, and we have Ka'u here on this island, and they have an island named Savaii, and we have Hawaii. So there's definitely a connection with Samoa. But what route did they take to get here? So I'm going to show you what I think. Oh, no, I'm not. This is the first. This is what the archaeologists say. So based on geography and nuclear Polynesian innovations, these are the dates. This is a long time ago, though. These are the dates they came up with a long time ago. So you can see the earliest BC means before Christ, is going further behind. So they found in Samoa 1500 BC. That's a long time ago. That's where the first they started out. Then the next date they found, Marquesas, 700 BC. So that's many, many years after Samoa was first established. So, hey, how come it took so long? By Pauli's theory that they moved out of Samoa very quickly. So that's a problem. And then, where's the, I guess, look, Mangareva is an Easter island. They're later, oh no, Easter Island is AD 300. We're AD right now, 2022. So Easter Island was before Hawaii. How did they get to Easter Island before they got to Hawaii? And worse yet, how did they get to Easter Island before they got to New Zealand? And the dates are all screwed up. So they say, well, we just didn't dig in the right place. We didn't dig in the right place. So we're still digging, trying to figure it out. And they're still digging. Okay. So now, here we have another map just to show you the geography of how close Samoa really is to Tahiti. So here we have Samoa. All they have to do is go, they could go down. They were going back and forth to Tonga all the time. We know that. They're marrying each other, having wars. The Tongans and Samoans sometimes didn't get along very well, but sometimes they got along really well. So they're living together. That's why you have a Western Polynesian culture, that they share things. So they're sharing culture. Same thing like in Hawaii, we have the spam musubi, got the spam from America and the rice and nori from Japan, but it's part of Hawaii today. So same thing, they were sharing back and forth. But that's out of context. So these guys, if the guys sailed from Samoa, it makes sense they just go east. So here the Cook Islands, Rarotonga, if they're going down to Tonga, all they have to do is sail out this way. They could get to Rarotonga. And Raro means under, it's under Tonga. Yeah, that's where it is. So maybe that's where they went first. And then there's over here is Tahiti. Maybe they went to Tahiti. Or maybe they went to the Marquesas Islands over here, but it's the farthest away, and you would think they'd hit these other islands first. So this is the Samoa East Polynesian theory. And these are other nuclear Polynesian islands, Tokelau, maybe some of you heard of the Tokelauans. I think, what's his name? Tihati is Tokelauan. Okay, and then East Uvea and East Futuna, I told you about that. Okay, so this again is the Samoa East Polynesian theory. Now we have a new theory, which is the one that I came up with. So maybe I'll give you a little background of how I came up with this. My wife and I were in Hawaiian language at UH Manoa, and then people were having a hard time figuring out what is the correct way to say something. And you can ask kupuna, and then sometimes they say this, and sometimes whatever. When you ask them, it's hard for them to think, but you have to listen to how they talk. But then how do you analyze it to come up with a pattern and all that? So both of us went into linguistics, and she was in helping them figure out about Pidgin, because of course she can speak Pidgin. If you're a Hawaiian, her family's from Molokai, they can all speak Pidgin, plus her parents and grandparents could all speak Hawaiian, and she was learning Hawaiian. So she was an informant for the Pidgin project. And I went into historical linguistics, like how did Hawaiian come from the Polynesians? And so I studied that, and I wrote my PhD on the possessives like ko'u and ka'u and ku'u and all of that. And that's where I got this idea. So in my dissertation, I found just a little hint of it, and I put it in a footnote. And then we moved here to Hilo and got all involved in Kulakaiapuni and Punana Leo. And I wrote one article in 1985 and didn't do any more linguistics. Gotta worry about the children first. And I still advocate that. You gotta worry about the children first. So, but this is what my theory came out to be. So from Samoa, they moved over to the Southeast Solomon's Polynesian outliers. And then they moved up through the northern outliers. And then they sailed from there into East Polynesia. So this is like, why go all around the round robin to reach here? But that's my theory, and I'll show you more about it. So the homeland, because remember we talked about where's the homeland. I'll show you, there's like this corridor from the central northern outliers, moves through this area, that the end of the corridor is Marquesas. So that explains why they have these old dates in the Marquesas. And then the little islands in between are very small and dry. And so people haven't done a lot of research on them, and they don't have any people on them. They only have archaeological remains. So the Proto-East Polynesian homeland was the Phoenix Islands, the Line Islands, and the Marquesas. That's where the first East Polynesians settled, in my theory. That's where the Proto-Eastern Polynesian began. That's where the distinctive language and the distinctions that are found in East Polynesia. But they also have shared innovations from the outlier islands, those little islands where they came from. So that explains why they gradually changed the language, not just only in East Polynesia, they changed it in these outliers too. And I'm going to show you the evidence for that shortly. So, and what is the language evidence? Those shared innovations, a little twist on a language, and then everybody has that same thing left in their language. So was first in my my PhD, I had to write on possessives like ko'u and ka'u, and I found this evidence. And then in 1985, I wrote a little article. And those of you who have work in a university, you know, have to publish or perish. They say, so you got to publish. So I had to publish on something. I picked this topic of this footnote and expanded on it. And then I had to do the real work, is to take care of the keiki. So I didn't do anything until somebody discovered my theory and wanted to write about it. And I'll get back to that later. But right now, a lot of the main linguists in the Polynesian and Austronesian area are accepting what I came up with. But there's still some people who don't. So I have to kind of defend it more. I have to write more on it. But again, this is not the most important thing in the world. You know, you got to take care of the family. But I'm going to show you about it. The big problem from the archaeologists is nobody's done any archaeology in the area where I said the East Polynesians came from. And it's very remote, and they're politically part of the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, which are very poor. So the people there, you know, there's not a lot of ships going there. And even on one of the islands, they still haven't converted to Christianity yet. So they have this thing, oh, we don't want you guys digging up our island. So so the archaeologists are kind of stuck with a somewhat East Polynesian hypothesis. Okay, so again, I'm going to show you the picture. So here's East Polynesia, this huge area. So who cares where they came from? They're just the best sailors in the world. They're really famous. They could go all the way to New Zealand and to Hawaii and all over to Easter Island, way in the far end over here. I don't know if you can see it. And then here we have the northern outliers right here. Sikayana, Luangyua, Taku like Ka'u, Kapingomarangi, and Nukuoro. These are the ones, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about Tikopia. Because I think what happened is they went from Samoa, East Uvea, Tikopia, and then they went up here, the northern outliers, and then from the area like Takulungyua, they sailed east. And this is the Phoenix Island. It's not written here. The Line Islands, Marquesas Islands, Line Island. They've covered this area. That's my theory. Oh, great. Okay, so here we have the outliers, and over here is Tikopia. So again, I said they reached here, and then they moved up through here. Now, so I got to explain all these little letters. Okay, so where's my arrow? So no, which is the big circle here, is northern outliers because they're the north. And then here, the CO, that's the Carolinian outliers because they're actually part of the Federated States of Micronesia and the Caroline Islands. Okay, but they're not Micronesians, they're Polynesians living on these islands. So my idea was that first they moved up here, they all spoke the same language, northern outlier, proto-northern outlier, and then the Carolinian outliers, they split off, and the remaining I called SNO. Can you see SNO? That's Solomon's Northern Outliers, because here are the Solomon Islands, they're off the coast of the Solomon Islands. So first they split into two. And then this one, the Solomon's Northern Outliers, split into Sikayana as itself, and then the CNO, Central Northern Ireland, not Ireland, Central Northern Outliers. So we now have them living here. These people all spoke dialects of the same language. Okay, and so I'm jumping into this next picture. So here we have some people on that island of Taku. It means has the same background as the word ka'u in Hawaiian and ta'u in Samoan, sailing around their atoll, going out for a fishing trip. But some of them, they can really sail. Okay, so my idea is that they sailed from someplace in here through this gap, and these islands may not have been up yet, the Gilbert Islands or the Tungaru, Kiripas, and Tuvalu. They're very low, and they moved into here, and these are low islands too, the Phoenix Islands, but they're higher than these ones. So they must have come out of the ocean earlier. And then we have the Line Islands here, the Southern Line Islands, the Northern Line Islands, and then Marquesas over here. I hope you can see the Marquesas. So I believe that these people moved into here and they moved very quickly, sailed through this area. And why? There's a wind that comes from here that goes this way periodically, and then it reverses. So what they could do is all they got to do is catch the right wind and then sail back when it reverses. So that's how they could reach the Marquesas Islands, all the way to the Marquesas Islands, and set up little colonies on some of these small islands, because they themselves live on small little atolls. So that's my basic idea here that I'm going to try to prove to you, showing shared innovations of between these Central Northern Outliers especially, and all the East Polynesians. So after they're living here, they're living here, I guess I'm going to jump ahead. Some of them, like the ones in the Southern Line Islands, they went south, and that's where Tahitian Maori come from. And some of them living up here in this Washington, Teraina, Crisimas, they went north, and they are the ancestors of the Hawaiians. And then later, there the Tahitians, the Marquesans, the Hawaiians sailing back and forth as well. But the very first ones, I think, came from here. And maybe I'll tell you a little bit why later. But the big question is, did they really come from here? These little tiny old places like Hana? Okay, would they go out all there, you know? Where do these guys come from? So small places can have big effects. That's my theory. Okay, so here's an example of one of the Phoenix Islands. They're flat, they're atolls. They have, the Phoenix Islands have some rain, but they're also subject to droughts. The Line Islands are even worse. They're very dry. Marquesas Islands also is a little bit drier than Hawaii. I know you guys having a drought right now on Maui, but probably Hana and Ke'anai, they still got water. Okay, so here are some of the archaeological remains. Koihana are the things that remain. And this has a similar form to a East Polynesian marae, or like in Tahiti, not the New Zealand kind, and like a heiau, like a small heiau. So they don't have this kind of marae in Samoa. In Samoa, malai is just like the big park, a big grassy park. So this is evidence that there were people living on the Phoenix Islands and Line Islands, although there was no people there when Captain Cook came into the Pacific. They were related to the East Polynesians. It's very clear that they had that cultural connection. Okay, so there are no people there, so we can't look at the language, but there are things that we can tell by looking at Marquesan and Hawaiian and Tahitian. Okay, so here we have a picture of an Almi stock photo of the Marquesas Island. So they're kind of similar to Hawaii, that they have big poly and stuff like that. A little bit drier, but they're similar to Hawaii. So now, what are some of the problems? So this idea of the NO, Northern Outlier, EPN, East Polynesian, NO, Northern Outlier, East Polynesian hypothesis explains problems. Number one, now all the archaeologists are saying East Polynesia was settled late. So if it's settled late, that means not that long ago. Why are the Hawaiians, Tahitians, Maoris so different from the Samoans? Especially, I would say, in language, but they could also say cultural things and other. So, for instance, they don't have any kind of a heiau or in Samoa. And then there's also difference in the way they make their cloth. There's difference in the way some of the food plants that they have are not different. So the question is, okay, so let's leave that aside, the date there. But let's say, why are the oldest dates that the archaeologists keep finding in the Marquesas? So my answer to number one, yes, it was settled late because they came from the outliers. They came from these outliers and not that long ago. So, and the language changed as they move through the outliers. So we can see those changes from the outliers in the East Polynesian languages. And the reason the oldest date is in the Marquesas is because they sail directly east, and the Marquesas are directly east from those central northern outliers. And they had some stepping stones in those Phoenix and Line Islands. So what linguists do is they create genealogies. So I hope all you Hawaiians out there know it, your genealogy. And so, but the difference with a language genealogy is you only have one parent, you don't have two, one parent. So here at the top, this is Proto-Polynesian, the ancestor language that was first, when they first reached the Tonga Samoan area, there were one people. They're one people, and slowly their language changed, not the same as Fijian. They had innovations, they did new things, new types of words. Then those new words are in Hawaiian. Trying to think of one right off the top of my head, but I can't. Okay, then there was a split between the Tongan homeland and the Samoan homeland. So we concentrated on this one, and that was the one where they changed Tasa, up here was Tasa, they changed it to Tasi. And they kept Tasa, but they pronounced it Taha. This side, they had Ani at the beginning, and they changed it to, they kept Ani, but these guys changed it to Nei. So all of these guys have the word Nei, everybody. Okay, now the question is, the idea is this was spoken in Samoa. So what happened after that? Well, I'm not going to talk about these guys. So the dotted line means you're not exactly sure what happened over here. That's not my focus. And exactly what steps they went from Samoa to what I'm calling the Proto-Solomons, the Southeast Solomons outlier, East Polynesian. That means Tikopia. They reached this place. I'll show you again on the map. They reached there and then they went north. So I can investigate these languages and show where they developed something sharing with the northern outliers in East Polynesia. And then I'm going to show that the northern outliers in East Polynesia, they split, and those Carolinian outliers, the Proto-Carolinian outlier, they had a common ancestral language, and they split eventually into Kapingamarangi and Nuku'oro. And over here, the Proto-Solomons, northern outliers, East Polynesian ancestor, was living in the rest of the northern outliers, and then they split. And you got that Sikayana Island to the south, and the proto-central northern outliers and East Polynesian ancestor was left in the central northern outliers. And then they sailed east, and they became the Proto-Eastern Polynesians. Wait, I want to change this back first. Okay, so I'm going to go over it one more time. There's this ancestor spoken in the Samoa Tonga area, one language, and then it split. So proto-language is the ancestral language at the time it split. So the split was the latest time there were this, oh my gosh, the latest time that there were a unit, then they split. And you got Proto-Tongic and Tongan and Niuean come from there. Proto-nuclear Polynesian on the other side, that's the ancestor of Hawaiian and everybody else. So they were living in Samoa, everybody really agrees, and they somehow they got to Tikopia, an outlier off the Southeast Solomons. And from there, some moved north. The ones who left south, they had Proto-Southeast Solomons outliers. So there's Tikopia and some other languages there. And then they went north, and they covered all these north area, and they're all one people. And then eventually the farthest guys away start talking Fanikain, and that became Proto-Carolinian outlier, and those two top northern islands descend from that. Everybody else, Proto-Solomons, northern outlier, were living together, and then the Sikayana guys were different, and these guys were different, the ancestors of Hawaiian with these people here, and they split. So these guys went to East Polynesia, Proto-Eastern Polynesians, they developed their own words, and these guys continued to change some of their own words. Okay, so now we're gonna go, I hope this is semi-clear. Now we're gonna look at some of the evidence. So I'm assuming you guys recognize some of these birds. So in Proto-Polynesian, there was a bird that everybody putting in all the evidence together was pronounced kiu, kiu. And the little star means this is what everybody assumes it was by comparing the languages. They call it reconstruction. So, and this East Uveian is one of those islands right close to Samoa, a high island. They say Q and some others say Q. So, but what happens? Now we find that everybody who descends from the people who lived in the northern outliers all the way up to Nuku'oro, they changed the word to Kiwi. And then the people in the Solomon's northern outliers, East Pond, they kept the word Kiwi too. They didn't change it. And then these guys in the Proto-Central northern outliers, East Polynesians, they kept the word too. And they kept it all the way to Proto-East Polynesian, and the descendants are the Maori word Kiwi, the Manihiki word Kihi. There's some Kiwi too, like in Tuamotu, and Hawaiian Iwi. So they all refer to birds that have a long bill. And in fact, everybody predicts that this is the bird that originally was called this, but in New Zealand, they didn't have this bird. And it got this name. And then in Hawaii, although we have this bird, it's called Kioea, the word was moved over to this, maybe because of the beak. Okay, so that's example number one, showing that the East Polynesians are connected to the Northern outliers. Okay, so next, here's another word. So maybe you guys know the sand crab, and that the Hawaiian name for that is ohiki. And I hear some of you guys on Lanai eat them, but other places they don't eat them. But anyway, so ohiki. So we're gonna see how this word changed to have shared innovations. So maybe before we say just ohiki, I want to remind you that Hawaiian has K and T being the same sound. And in fact, some places, like we have tapes on Kaleo Hawaii radio program with the Maui people, after an I, they would say a T sound, like makahiti, they would say it like that. And so, or hiti meaning arrive, and ohiti. So you should stand behind that Maui pronunciation for this crab. It'll help you figure out what I'm saying. So ohiti. So we know that in Proto-Polynesian and Proto-Nuclear Polynesian, it was called a kawiki, and it goes back in other Austronesian languages. So the Samoans, they changed the K to an okina, and many, many places do that. It's not a shared innovation. It's something that's very commonly happens with the mouth. So, and Hawaiian does that too, like ka'u comes from taku. And then what happened? My goodness, these people here in the Northern outliers, they changed the K to a T. Can you see that K change to the T? And then it kept going down, all the ancestors, and it reached East Polynesia. So we think it was called Cavite because we know over here, and then in this little island, Mangareva, they call it Cavite Viti. In Easter Island, they call it Viti Viti. And then the guys, the closest relatives of Hawaiian, they all change it to an O. So Penrhyn Island, they say Kohiti, Hawaiian is Ohiti or Ohiki, and the Rarotongans say Ko'iti, and they even have something similar in New Zealand called Kofiti Fiti. So that's another example of a shared innovation, the change of this K to T. So the Tongans have the K, the Samoans have the K. The K is the old thing. So the change is what tells you who your relatives are. Okay, so now we have another thing. Now this is Ha'uke. That's the Hawaii name. So I will use the Maui name, but Maui, you guys took them a little bit further. You call it Ha, or at least Hana. Ha'ue'ue. I don't know if you guys know the Ha'ue'ue. This one here is the most common one. And then this one, some people call Ha'uke ula ula. I don't know on Maui what it's called, but anyway, I guess you guys know this. This kind of one with the red one is found everywhere in the Pacific. The little purple one that we know is only in Hawaii, but they use the same name for both of them. Okay, so we're gonna look at this word. So it's a type of sea urchin, for those of you who want to know that. So Proto-Nuclear Polynesian was Watuke. And we know this because not only Samoan, but these other languages related to Samoan close by, and even going back further, it was this. So what happens with the Samoans, they write it Vatue. They actually say Vakue. But anyway, they write it with a T. And so it goes perfectly well. The W becomes a V, that's no problem. Everything else doesn't change, except the K becomes an okina. So we know that when they went to the Northern outliers, they still had Watuke. But then in the Solomon's Northern Islands, that's Sikayana and those central ones, they changed the W to an F. What a deal. So they changed it to an F. So then they inherited it was an F. All those islands show an F, which should be an F. And Proto-East Polynesian, we know it was an F. But F sometimes in Eastern Polynesia, like in Hawaiian, becomes an H. So like Fade Hale. And so here we have East Polynesian examples. Tuamotus, they say fatuke. And the Niihauans, they say ha ku'e, which is good. So the F becomes an H and the T becomes a K, or they say ha tu'e, and then the K becomes an okina. And then in Hawaii, they do what they call metathesis. You know, like ask your brother. It's supposed to be ask, not ax. So it's switching the letters. If you think it's only something new in Pidgin, ask your brother. No, that's an old Hawaiian trait of switching letters. And not only Hawaiians, other Polynesians. But this one, Maui, you guys took the cake and got rid of the K. I don't know how come they did that. But the main thing is the H. The H shows the ancestry back to the F. Okay, so I hope that was not too complicated. So now we're going to have another one. I already forgot the Japanese name for this. The pao, you know, the jumping fish when you go to the shoreline and they're in the kaheka, the tide pools, and they go jumping out of and jumping into the water. That's this pao. Okay, so here we got the fish. And lo and behold, in Samoan and all these guys back in Central Polynesia, they call it manoko. And we know it was also manoko when they moved into the Northern Outliers, because those guys up in the far north in Nukuoro and Kapingamarangi, they still keep the M. But lo and behold, when they got into the Solomon's Northern Outliers, where the central, they changed the M to a P. And they kept it that way. And they kept it in the P. They kept the P in the east. So Rarotonga, they say panoko. And I'm going to get to Hawaii in a bit. And New Zealand, they also have a fish called panoko. It's in their streams. And even in Easter Island, they have one named paroko, where the N and the R is connected. But in Hawaii, we have two words. We have pano'o, and that's the one they use up at Ni'ihau, and then pa'o used down here in Hawaii. And so what I think happened was pano'o was the original word here in Hawaii. And then, as I said, they were sailing back and forth after Hawaii was settled. And some Marquesans did come to Hawaii. And they introduced they lost the N. So they say pauko. And then we got pa'o. So pa'o is a borrowed word. It's taken from, it's like puke is from English. So it was borrowed from Marquesan, I believe. But the original Hawaiian word was pano'o. But we now have two of them, two words. Okay, so that's a complication. What you have to be able to do is look for the connections, what's a borrowing and what's not a borrowing. Now, this is a little bit more complicated. And so instead of going over this in detail, I'm just going to say that it's in the grammar. The grammar is less likely to change than the vocabulary. And the grammar shows, including the possessives, shows the history of the Eastern Polynesian languages. So I have a lot of grammar examples, and this is made from linguists, and we can look at that later if somebody really wants to get into it. However, there's new things that have come out that people have found. So one thing is human genes. Now they're taking people's genes and looking at them and say, oh, your ancestors came from here. You know, you can send in the paper and find out, oh my gosh, we're not that. They always told us we're that. No. Okay, so some people have started to look at the genes in Polynesians, and they found, lo and behold, like this boy here, he's from the Outliers. He's actually, I think, from Sikayana, but they did genetic tests on the people in Central Northern Outliers and on Tahiti, and they found that there had a gene link between the two, an unexpected gene link. They didn't, because they weren't testing this theory. It just happened that they found that. And then another thing that has turned up, this is a cultural thing that I found, is that on one of the outliers, they have these whalebone clubs. And the whalebone clubs look like whalebone clubs that they have in New Zealand called Parawa. And the outlier island of Taku, they're called Paramoa. And archaeologists have found these clubs in their diggings in Tahiti, all over the place. They found these clubs of this thing, and they call, and throughout East Polynesia, the word for whalebone or whale tooth is parawa, or in Hawaiian it's palawa, niho palawa. You know, the niho palawa is a whale tooth or whale bone. So anyway, they lost the M when they went to East Polynesia, but originally meant, this means wing, chicken wing. So the club represents a chicken wing. And I think I'm at the end. So again, what I say is they went from Samoa, they went from Samoa up through here, and then out from here, out from the central northern islands, through to the Line Islands, Marquesas. Hawaiians went from here up first, and Tahitians, whatever, came from here. And from Marquesas, they went to Easter Island and Mangareva. And that's the end. Here's a picture of the little village on Taku Island. And here's a Hawaiian saying, Li'ili ka'ohiki loloa kaloa. The crab, sand crab, small, but they dig a big hole. So those little people on those islands, I believe, they were the people who discovered East Polynesia, not the Samoans. Okay, so I'm gonna call it a day right there and take any questions. Thank you for showing up, Bianca. I know I took too long. Can't even-
We can't hear you, Bianca.
Thank you, Lance. So, okay, thank you for your talk. Please center your questions into the chat. Some other people were suggesting words that have genealogies that might have been relevant to some of your arguments.
Sure.
Words such as like hale and
Mhm.
hina, referring to a bird. Can you speak to that?
I can talk about hale. I didn't hear the other word, but
Hina, referring to a particular, or to bird. I haven't heard it.
hina is like gray, like po'ohina, like me, gray-headed, you know, or hina is to fall, like, let me think of. Part
I
of
may
the
be
problem-
misinterpreting his question or his comment.
Yeah, what bird is it? Okay, so let me talk about hale first. Yes, hale can be reconstructed all the way back to Proto-Polynesian. And then beyond Proto-Polynesian can go into the next language up, which includes Fijian. They say vale. And then you can even get, I think the Filipinos have palai or something like that, of certain kind of a thing. So
Yeah,
it's
in
even-
Ilocano. Balai and
Okay.
Ilocano.
Okay, so the Ilocano started first, or it wasn't the Ilocanos, it was the common ancestors of the Hawaiians and the Ilocanos way back. So the problem with that word is it's shared by everybody. There's no innovation. No innovation. And so there's a lot of words that have no innovation. What you got to do is try and find that weird, it's kind of like a mutation. It's like a mutation in biology. So, and I'm not saying I used ehu, and that's not really a good example, but in a human, if suddenly somebody has 6 fingers and then everybody who descends from that person has 6 fingers, that's what you're looking for. So unfortunately, hale only shows your Polynesian or even Austronesian.
So Wason Jesus, I'm sorry, asked the question, are there any words uniquely developed here in Hawaii?
Oh, yes. So I'll give one right here because I was pulling on my Pepeyao. So the Proto-East Polynesian word was taringa. So the Maori say taringa, the Tahitians say taria, and Samoans say talinga, and the Fijians have dalinga, and I think it goes all the way. Who's our friend who knows Ilocano? What is ear in Ilocano? Hopefully they
Lance?
kept doesn't know that one. Okay, well, I think it goes way back.
Oh, sorry. I was in the other room. It's La Payag.
Okay, so must be the Tagalogs kept it, and you folks, the Ilocanos got rid of it. I don't know. Maybe it only goes back a little, not that far. It doesn't reach all the way to the Philippines. No, but what was I gonna say here? So Pepeyao is a unique word of Hawaii, and like ha'ue'ue, which I gave earlier, is a unique word of Maui, where they got rid of that K, or it could have been a T at one time. That's still in Hawaii, where we say ha'uke, and on Niihau they say ha'ku'ekue. There's a switch between, but ha'ue'ue is an innovation from Maui. So if the people of Maui went off and they settled California and they kept the Hawaiian language there, and if they said ha'ue'ue for a certain kind of sea urchin, we would know they came from Maui.
So one other question, is there evidence of word borrowing or sharing from Micronesian neighbors of the outliers in Eastern Polynesia that are absent in the Tongan and Samoan branches?
I know that there are some Micronesian borrowings in Nuku'oro and Kapingomana. In fact, they live on Ponape, those people. So they have more recent borrowings, but they also have older borrowings. I don't have any examples that I know off the top of my head. Another thing that they also borrowed from Micronesia supposedly was weaving. So in Micronesia, people weave banana fibers. They make really nice type of lava type, or even malos by weaving. And the loom was borrowed by the Northern Outlier people. So they did have contact with outliers, but I haven't been able to find any particular words that may have happened with a contact at a earlier time. I'm kind of suspicious that the Kiripas were not there yet, but I know the other Micronesians were definitely there before East Polynesia was settled. And I'm going to mention one weird thing that I have been interested in that I haven't really studied this, but I'm interested in, is that, you know, like our Hawaiian moon calendar that has a different name for every night. I heard that that also exists in Micronesian languages. It's not found in Samoan or Western Polynesia. They don't have specific names. They might use numbers and something like that, but they don't have names. So that's something that shared between East Polynesia and Micronesia. Not, you know, the people like Chukis, the Chukis people, they're the big sailors. So we have to shout out to Sarawal and Maupiolo, those people.
This is a question from Kanani Puo. As a linguist, why is it hard to learn the Hawaiian language?
Any language is hard. You think how far, imagine, you just even Pidgin. How many people not born and raised in Hawaii can speak? Go see, go down to Kihei and go try it. See if you can find one. So any language is hard unless you're born with it from the beginning. But I would say the Hawaiian language is easier for people who know Pidgin, who were born and raised in Hawaii, than for people from away.
And Christine Reed, how much influence did the conversion to a written language from an oral one have?
Okay, I'm gonna say not very much in terms of pronunciation. So I'm gonna ask, has anyone been on Oahu? What do they call the North Shore place with the shaved ice?
Matsumoto?
Haleiwa. Not
Oh, sorry.
Haleiwa. Okay, so it's written with a W. How come everybody says Haleiwa? Okay, and so, or how come we say kanani, not kanani? So the in English, you know, the English pronunciation of the letter, it's not based on the how it's pronounced in another language. So even in English, like look how English is spelled, and people don't pronounce it the way it's spelled. So the fact, and I'll give you an even a worse example is the missionaries didn't write the Okina. But you listen to a tape of any kupuna talking, they got Okinas all over the place. They're supposed to be the second most common consonant. And how come they just didn't stop pronouncing the Okina? So the writing is nice to have, and that's where Hawaiians are super fortunate. There's not a race of people in the Pacific that have so much writing, thanks to Lahaina Luna, so much writing, so much written records of traditions and everything. It's just, I mean, there's more written records of Hawaiian language than even Greek. So, I mean, this is the ancient Greek. I'm not talking about, you know, the one they're talking now in Athens. So it's just huge.
From Kauzana Seto, at what point were the Easter Islands settled, and how closely is their language to Olelo Hawaii?
Okay, I would say, well, before I'm going to talk about the settling, you can't tell the dates by linguistics. You got to dig up bones and whatever, charcoal. But you can tell what's the order of how people went. So again, I said they went from the central northern outliers to they reached Marquesas, and the Rapa Nui people or Easter Island are from the Marquesas. So they went south to Mangareva, which is kind of southeast of the Marquesas, and then they moved out from there. And they it's widely believed that they went to Pitcairn, if you've heard of Mutiny on the Bounty. But Pitcairn was very small, and the people there eventually died out too. So they went Marquesas, Mangareva, maybe Pitcairn to Easter Island. And I think what happened was the people realized they were land to the east. So they kept going east, figuring out ways to go east and find where the winds were. And that's probably how the sweet potato got to all of Eastern Polynesia from those people from Marquesas going out east. While the ancestors of the Hawaiians and Tahitians, etc., I believe, were on those little smaller islands, and they just kept being friends with the outliers for a long time. They kept going, hey, we'll go visit our cousins, not charging off to Easter Island of all places. But their language, they say, here's how they say, how are you? Pehe koi, pehe koi. So you can see they have, it's all the Eastern Polynesian languages, and Easter Island is a Eastern Polynesian language. They're all close, but the Easter Islanders, they're so isolated, they weren't sailing back and forth, sharing things like that pao fish I mentioned. Anyway, that's my take on it.
So if you have, and Kanani also pointed out in Samoan, who am I only? So I guess also close.
Oh, but okay, so that's not a good one. So let me try something else that they might have that's not in Samoan. Because actually, again, Samoan is closely related, but it's much further than any Eastern Polynesian language. So, okay, I can't speak Samoan, so it's putting me up in a a spot. Okay, but I'll mention one thing that Samoans have, that Tongans also have, is this chiefly language. That you have to say the right word. I think it's Sua. Oai lo suafa, not, I think. Or one is it Oai lo ingoa and one is Oai lo suafa. I forget. They have these different levels that none of the Eastern Polynesian languages have. It's a very Western Polynesian trait. But to think of some, the word for dog, maile, and ilio, uri, they're not related, but that's a recent thing in Samoan. It's not a, or people believe it's recent. So let me think of another one. Yeah, gosh, got me. I should have been more prepared because I should have known people know Samoan. Give me a little time. Give me another question. I'll be thinking about someone. Oh, I mentioned about the sand crab. VE versus kaviti. It's not aviki in Samoan. I mean, with the T, aviti in Samoan, it's avi'i. I gave that example earlier. And also I gave the example of the pa'uke called vatue. So those are where they're different. I mean, that someone is older there. That someone's gonna say, hey, we're older. But with a dog, maile is, you got your plants and your animals mixed up there. Nah. It's a funny thing, like Hawaiian pu'u means your throat, and in Maori puku, which means your stomach. So moves their stomach up in the throat or the throat down in their, people move the words around. Okay.
Fascinating. Do your accounts of settlement or your linguistic histories, are they, do they ever conflict with those of other historians that aren't linguists, or do you guys pretty much tell the same story?
No, as I mentioned, the archaeologists right now, there's one archaeologist who named Matthew Spriggs, who has supported what I said. He said archaeologists should go and dig in those outliers, the central northern outliers. And but no one has gone there to dig. So it's kind of like a different data set, and they keep digging, but they have the same problem of how come the oldest dates are in the Marquesas rather than closer to Samoa, like a straight line, expected line. That's one thing. And then they haven't really been able to connect the old stuff in Samoa with the oldest stuff in East Polynesia. They haven't, because even with artifacts, people change, fashions change. So a fishhook, if a certain style of fishhook, the oldest style of fishhook in East Polynesia should match a certain type of fishhook found in excavations in Samoa. And they haven't really found that kind of clear data, like shared form, that's not found elsewhere. It's not an innovation. However, I'll mention there also is a word for a type of fishhook, like the fishhook you catch aku with. It has a special name in the northern outliers and that same name in much of East Polynesia. So that's another linguistics argument. Anyway, the archaeologists are not all on board, and there are linguists too who are going, yeah, how can that be? We want more evidence.
Any last words? I think we're gonna close up here.
Well, I just want to
For the
support everything that you guys are doing and sharing people's thoughts. I don't want people to think that what I'm proposing or have my research is a very, very, very last word. In science, there's never a very, very last word. But in tradition and culture, there are traditions that need to be kept. The Hawaiian language is a really important thing that my family, my wife, my children, and many people on Maui are doing. And then a lot of other things of doing taro and pounding poi, everything that you guys are doing is really important. So all of this science stuff is interesting, but to me, it's not that big of a deal compared to what you're really doing there on the ground.
Thank you so much for that. And please, if you get a chance, look at the Facebook post. There's a ton of just wonderful comments. I just didn't get to read them all because they weren't all questions.
Okay, and
Thank
I
you
want
so
to
much
really
for coming.
mahalo people who actually listen this evening instead of, I don't know what's on TV right now, Netflix or something. So I hope it
Well,
was entertaining.
Dr. Wilson, please also check back on the Facebook because people who were not able to watch it right now because they had something else going on, they will pose questions, a week or 2 weeks from now. So please don't be obligated, but if you wish to, please feel free to monitor the video because people do ask questions that watch it later.
Okay, I'll ask my daughter to help. As you mentioned, po'ohina means gray hair. I don't know how to use Facebook stuff.
Okay.
So don't think I'm that smart. Okay, but I'll try and keep up, and if people have questions, I'll try and answer them. I appreciate the fact that people are interested in this.
Oh, there's a lot of interest.
Okay.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Have a-
Mahalo to the Samoans and the Micronesians. I support you guys. Okay, bye-bye.